I'm in Sierra Madre, so near Pasadena. And I don't know if you saw when you were out here, but we've got the crazy parrots in Pasadena.
4 or 5 times just back and forth.
I remember this, so they're really centrally located, like right here in Sierra Madre. And I can see a couple right now. When I first moved in, I mean, I thought I was hearing chimpanzees. I'd never heard that sort of screeching before. It's like living in a pet shop and it's all around you. And yeah, definitely different.
It was kind of magical, having that at a wedding. But I mean, I assume that those are pet parrots that were let loose at some point, right?
Okay, so I know the story.
Oh, good.
One of our neighbors, who is one of the co-owners of this little marketplace called Mary's Market, her father or her grandfather, I can't remember, owned a pet shop that was burning down, and he released all these animals into the wild. Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure style, like running out with all the snakes, birds flying out. So he let a bunch of these parrots that are not native. They're native to like Mexico, and they're actually going extinct from what I gather in their natural habitat. But for some reason, this terrain was just completely suitable for their survival, and they thrived. They thrived in Pasadena. They thrived in these mountains. From what I hear, them being released is like one of the main reasons why they're not going to go extinct, like period.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, I was wondering, as I said, I was at this wedding, and 4 or 5 times I saw them, and I assumed it was just the same 4 or 5 parrots going back and forth that,
No, they are everywhere. They're thriving.
LA kid, grew up there, obviously, and were an actor for much of your youth. How did you move out to Indiana?
My first escape was to Boston, like I was telling you. I was sort of living with friends and playing in a pop group called With Engines that didn't really go anywhere. And then they were all finishing their last year at Berkeley. And that was sort of my first taste of like something truly different. And then we all moved back to LA, and then I started playing with Foxygen, rekindled relationship with Sam and Rado.
You grew up with those guys, right?
Yeah. I mean, like I think we all went to the same middle school, but I really kind of knew them from being in high school. And yeah, we started, playing, and Foxygen, kind of blew up there and doing a lot of touring. And I ended up moving to New York City with Rado. I was living in like essentially his storage closet.
I've been there.
Yeah, it was Manhattan. So
I did that in Brooklyn, which is really pushing it.
So I mean, yeah, it's a part of being young, and you can do that for a while. And we were out. So Foxygen's label, Jaguar, they're based in Bloomington, Indiana. So I had been there once or twice for we did a couple shows there. We picked up merchandise there when we're traveling through. And yeah, so I already had a good support there, a group there. And we were going back out to Bloomington for 2 weeks. Sam and Rado had rented a house to start preliminary recordings of what would be Star Power. And it just wasn't the right vibe. It didn't work. Rado ended up having the Dub Thompson kids come out, fly out to Bloomington, and he ended up using that place to record their debut record, which I think is called 9 Songs. Really cool, really punk rock, awesome. But I had 2 weeks to just hang out in Bloomington because I wasn't needed then. And I met my now wife. Yeah. So there's the big one.
Always the story.
Yeah. So I met Melinda in Bloomington. I think once before when I was out there. She was friends with a lot of people on the label, so a lot of mutual friends. And they had just bought a house, and I was talking about how much I really didn't care for living in New York. Mostly, I bet I would have had a better time had I been living in Brooklyn and not in Manhattan in a closet. But it just wasn't for me. I didn't know enough people there, and I was always on the road and paying Manhattan rent and not living there. It just I wasn't having a good time. So I was relaying that to them, and they're like, well, I just bought this place, and if you want to, like, I've got an extra room for rent if you want to move out. And we were already at that point, we were vibing. I had been like helping them take popcorn off the ceiling and do a little light demoing on the house. And it's like, yeah, I would love that. And we drove up there immediately and grabbed all my stuff like mid-tour and brought it all the way down. And all of a sudden I was a Midwesterner. Fast forward 10 years later and married, and we had, a house, and we were a couple dogs, and we were, growing, laying down roots.
10 years, I mean, it stuck.
When you drink the water for 10 years, I think you become a townie officially.
It doesn't stick with everybody though, right? I mean, it did stick for you in New York for, what it sounds like were kind of circumstantial problems, but especially coming from LA and coming from New York, there's a shift in pace of life that you have to deal with.
Sure. But you got to remember, I wasn't in LA proper. I was in Agora Hills, which was a small town. It felt like, people call it the Agora bubble. Funny, like agoraphobia means like fear of
open spaces.
Yeah, small spaces. So, it really did feel like that. But there is like a nostalgia for home. So I was traveling all over and living in the city, and actually Bloomington felt kind of like living in Agora in a way, a more Midwestern version. I mean, it's a college town, so it fluctuates, but we were on the outsides, and, LA was like a couple hours away from Agora, and then you could always go to Indianapolis or Chicago, which is a couple hours away. And it just had a very similar, relaxed feel to it. And I think it was really easy for me to settle in.
The one thing that I always hear is that I don't know, is the right word, maybe was, but perhaps still is, but it was a good punk town. It was a good DIY town.
There's definitely an awesome DIY scene. I had never experienced, maybe because there's a lack of basements in California, but that sort of like house show scene, those like underground punk shows. There's a really cool band that I think was one of the last bands I saw in Bloomington, the Cowboys. They have a really cool record they just put out. But yeah, kind of DIY house punk scene, like that still exists like throughout the Midwest. But yeah, definitely Bloomington still has that in spades.
Part of why I'm curious is, and I don't know if this is the case that much anymore now that obviously the music industry has changed substantially, but all the stories that you hear of people moving to pursue music professionally, it's largely, obviously like Nashville's in there too, but like it's New York and LA, and you were in both of those places, and somehow you ended up in this third place. How was that as a base of operations?
Well, so a lot of those people will move out to, for lack of a better word, quote unquote, make it in the industry, or, really in a sense to begin their careers. They're looking for that big break. I mean, for me, I got just really lucky and with Foxygen, just kind of, again, right place, right time for them. And that also included me, right place, right time. So I had already, established myself in a way. And then like I knew when I just showed these like series of demos to, the people at JAG, like they really helped me get set up with Western Vinyl, like get those break, through all the red tape that a lot of upcoming artists have to navigate around. I just, again, right place, right time. And I got really lucky. And so I was already established when I was like at that point living in New York, and I was already touring. And then now I had like Diane Coffee was on the way, the debut record, which I recorded in that apartment in New York. So yeah, like when I was in Bloomington, like things were already in motion. And at that point, it's just like make records, go on tour, be silly on the internet, and just keep doing what you're doing. And you can do those things anywhere. So it was really nice because, it is a whole lot cheaper in the Midwest. I had great access to a studio, Mellencamp's old studio, which a couple of buddies bought, and some of the touring artists on the Everybody's a Good Dog tour, like they run that ship now, and I had like lockout access to it like whenever I wanted. it just everything worked, you know. And then it was easy, and I didn't have to live in LA and drive, you know, an hour and a half through traffic just to go to a rehearsal space that I'm paying for. It made a lot of sense, and it was easy.
That's funny. I didn't even think of Mellencamp. Does he kind of loom over that place in the way that like Springsteen does on the East Coast?
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's part of Bloomington's claim to music fame is the whole Mellencamp thing. Like, I remember there's like graffiti gets covered up anywhere you are, but there's one tag that never seemed to get covered up, kind of in the center square, and it just said "sucking on a chili dog."
Is it near a Tasty Freeze?
Yes, it's just the classic Mellencamp, and I mean, yeah, in that way, it's sort of like everyone knows Mellencamp, everyone knows. I mean, no one's really talking about Mellencamp out there, but you know, you see his dad at just like out at the restaurants and bars, like hanging out. Everyone knows the Mellencamps at this point. And yeah, I mean, his studio is still like right there in town. That is under a new name, but it's still being used. And I put out a couple great records from there myself. So like, still pumping out hits at the old Mellencamp compound. And yeah, so I guess so.
What's the timeline between Foxygen and Diane Coffee? I mean, did you sort of jump knowing that you had this solo thing waiting for you?
We were starting to do lots of European touring. So this was like, I was living with Rado at the very end of 2012. I had just moved in with him. And so, yeah, this is like kind of peak touring with Foxygen. You know, the things were going well. We were like traveling through Europe and stuff. And I think we had just gotten off a European tour, and Rado had gone back to Los Angeles to spend the holidays with his family and Jackie. And I remember I was all alone, and I got sick, and I just started, you know, what everyone always does, like just demoing, just because I had a computer and free time and I didn't want to go outside. And it was like New Year's Eve was the first song. The first day I started recording, the first song I wrote in a series of demos, which would become, you know, the My Friend Fish record. So I didn't even know I was writing a record. I was just making songs because I wanted to. Business as usual. And then those got into the hands of Western Vinyl, and, you know, Diane Coffee was born. And then I had to move back to LA. So the record came out in 2013. So somewhere in there, like probably summer of 2013, because the record came out in October, I think. That's when I moved to Bloomington. So for a long time, I was still juggling both the Foxygen tours as well as the Diane Coffee tours. Those were happening. Like we'd kind of plan out, just because Foxygen was the more important thing at that moment, the more established thing.
Pragmatically, the thing you could at least partially make a living doing.
Yeah, exactly. First album, first tour, definitely harsh on the old checkbook. But, you know, I was able to do that by, yeah, like kind of prioritizing the Foxygen tours and basing all the Diane Coffee tours around it, which was, you know, I gotta say, talking about, you know, Melinda, my then just like partner, I was never home. You know, it was a wild, turbulent time to, you know, we had to, you know, figure it out pretty quick, because it was like we were tossed in the deep end as far as like relationships go. But like that's sort of the timeline. So, and then I think when I finished those tours, and then I think I finished the final tour on the Star Power album Push, and I had recorded the Everybody's Good Dog record, and I was getting ready to like plan out all that stuff. And then, you know, Rado and Sam wanted to take the touring of their next record in a different way, with like big, you know, strings and horns and stuff. And so, yeah, it was kind of a nice, way for us to sort of like part ways. Like, you're going to do this new interpretation. And I mean, for me, it was, I always knew I was just like a hired gun. So it was really cool to do, that amount of playing with them. And then I just hopped on the train and just the Diane Coffee train and kind of never looked back. Then it was all Diane Coffee all the time.
It felt like you were just kind of along for the ride.
During the Foxygen days. I mean, yes and no. Like, there was a part of me that didn't want that to end. I mean, they're my family, and like some of the craziest touring I've ever done. Some of the wildest moments and biggest crowds and biggest venues I've ever played was with Foxygen. And when you're touring with like your lifelong buddies, I mean, it's special. It's fun. It was a really cool time. And yeah, I never really wanted it to end. I wanted to feel like, I'm irreplaceable. But, I knew my place. And I knew if they wanted to try something different and go a different route, that's their call, because they're the writers. So I respected that 100%.
Based on this conversation, I assume that that like you're not going to be getting a lot of your own songs on those records.
Oh, no. I mean, I never wrote. I like never even on Star Power. I think I never even played drums on Foxygen, which is funny. Like, when they had me in the studio for like the little bit of Star Power recording that I did, it was mostly like singing, and that's it. So again, I think that actually really helped me understand like where I stood with the band. It's, I was a live touring musician, not a part of the creative aspect of it, like especially recording. Like live, yeah, I could toss out ideas that I had, but like the recording, the songwriting, that was all them. Which was fun, which was fine to me. I mean, I was at that point up until I started writing the Diane Coffee stuff. I mean, the only reason I really showed people that was for the first time me feeling like I had written songs that I was proud of. I had never really up until that point wrote anything that I was ready to share with anyone. I didn't really like my writing. So while I was touring with them, I was fine. Like, I was kind of of the mindset, like, I can't write songs this good. I'm totally fine to just play drums and hang out on the bus and travel the world. And I was also in my early 20s, so it was like party 24/7.
What changed in the interim? What gave you the confidence to put these things out into the world?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like all of a sudden it was such a weird time. I think, I actually do think that like watching Sam and Rado and being around, because they were prolific. They've been writing songs since they were in like elementary school, middle school. So they had years of like songwriting on top of me at that point. And I think just being around them and watching them and being exposed to things they were, I mean, maybe it just helped my creative process, or just, who knows if that was it, or I just got to a point where, when I wrote those songs, I just listened to them and thought like, these are really cool and I'm proud of this. And I don't really know what changed. It just did. And, I had, obviously the first people I showed was like Sam and Rado, and they're like, this is cool. And I was like, cool, if you like this is really cool. And then I showed, some of the people at JAG, because we were in a sort of like, you're my friends, like, do you want to hear, like, let me show you this thing I just recorded, because now I'm like excited about it, with no intentions of anything other than just like wanting to share the stuff I made. And then, then it just all sort of happened. And when it did happen, there's like a little bit of validation, and I'm like, okay, people want to put this out and they believe in me. So, I can maybe believe in myself a little bit more and have a little more confidence. And then when you see people, fans and stuff, respond to it as well. I mean, songwriting is all about confidence. There's some songs out there with like some super goofy, silly lyrics that don't really mean anything, but you see someone deliver that who just full-heartedly believes in it. It's like, you know what, this is really cool. I can vibe on this. I think, at least 50% of what makes a song cool is just you thinking that it's cool and having faith in it.
I wonder how much your background as an actor helped, just in terms of not songwriting, but just in terms of being able to really not just put yourself out there, but to put yourself out there with either confidence or at very least fake confidence.
Definitely those first tours, like the My Friend Fish tours, there was definitely a lot of fake confidence because I was scared as all get out. But yeah, definitely coming from theater background, even like an improv background, and that also made it fun too because I got to explore this Diane Coffee character. In a way, I think for a long time, I sort of maybe use that as a crutch. I could hide behind that character a lot. And if Diane's out there, Diane will take care of everything. And she's wild and I can, Shaun can just kind of let that be the front and center. Fast forwarding to now, I actually think with this album, the whole idea of it was just to really pull back the curtain or drop the facade or whatever it is and actually kind of show who Shaun Fleming is a little bit, the other half of Diane Coffee.
Well, we talked about Shaun a bit. Who is Diane and what is the distinction?
Diane, okay, I always thought of Diane as more of like an energy than like an alternate ego or persona. Diane Coffee to me is that feeling that you get, let's say you're a shy, reserved kid and you go see a show and that energy within the audience just consumes you and all of a sudden you're screaming at the top of your lungs and dancing along with everyone else. It's that sort of energy. It's the voodoo. It's the thing that takes you outside of yourself. And yeah, and so, like I said, I never really thought of Diane Coffee as an alter ego. So, when my band is feeling that, they're Diane Coffee. And when the crowd is feeling it, they're Diane Coffee. Yeah. And, Diane Coffee is, that feeling is big. So Diane Coffee is big and bold and glam and beautiful. I needed Diane Coffee to help me through the beginning stages of my career. I was always a pretty shy kid up until high school. And then I discovered theater. I discovered improv comedy. I was on this thing called Comedy Sports for a while.
Yeah, I did Comedy Sports in San Jose.
Okay, so
I do. For better or for worse, I know.
Yeah, and
it's improv except with judges and referee shirts, basically.
it's improv, but there's even more pressure. But I mean, it was so much fun, and it is a way to just be silly and be crazy. And when you're doing improv, you're usually not yourself; you're a character. And I just, kept taking that little bit about my past and just like amplifying it and putting a magnifying glass on that. And all of a sudden it was Diane Coffee.
Were you acting prior to doing improv though? Because you were acting pretty young.
I was acting at like 6 years old. I started doing, I think the first thing I ever did was this TV series that never got picked up in the US. I heard it did pretty well in like Russia or something. It's called Cyber Kids with a Z, and I just discovered it's on YouTube. It's like Power Rangers, but with like little kids and virtual reality. It's crazy.
Did your parents kind of nudge you in that direction?
My dad was one of the producers on it. My dad's not in the film industry at all, but he was at the time like working with like investors to push this. It's kind of a weird combo pact of like virtual reality, and this is sort of like dawn of computers, and they actually bought up a bunch of old classic sci-fi rights and stuff, and they wanted to create, and this still blows my mind, they wanted to create a online streaming service where you could watch old sci-fi. So this is like pre-Netflix, all that, and it just tanked because no one was ready to watch TV and stuff like that, movies on
internet speeds weren't ready to watch TV.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was, it was before its time, but part of that was they were creating content for it as well. And this was, I think, one of the things they were using to jazz up investors. It was like, we'll make kid shows and it'll all tie in, which, it's super cool. And I would have loved to have been on the ground floor of pre-Netflix, but yeah, so that kind of got me into it. And then through that, because I was non-union, that was just with them, but all of a sudden I had something I could hand to, potential agents and managers, and got that. And then they, started setting me up on auditions and stuff. And I got into voice acting I landed a Disney role. And then once you're sort of in the Disney family, I was getting called in mostly for Disney stuff. And I think there was a time someone told me, and I have never verified this, but I like the idea of it. But I was told that I was at one point the most used child voice actor. It may be in Disney, maybe in the world. I don't know. But yeah, I always thought that was pretty cool. And I'll never check to see if that's true because it just makes me happy either way. But yeah, so I was acting for a long time. And then high school happened and, a couple things happened. My agent died, which just the old age just is a thing that just happened. And then my voice was starting to change too. And then also I found music at that, and I was starting to get really excited about that. And when I had to go get new headshots and find a new agent, and all of a sudden I was just treated as if I was had to start over, bottom of the barrel in their eyes, and I'm also in my teens. I'm like, to hell with this. I'm going to be a rock star. So I just kind of made that transition.
I'm going to try something even more difficult to do for a living.
I know.
Acting. More unrealistic.
I'm going to leave this career that's been super lucrative and awesome for many years, and I'm going to start over and become a rock star. Such a silly move, but
it worked, right?
I was talking to someone else the other day about this, and I think part of that was you're a teenager. I had a lot of stuff I wanted to say, and it took me until my early 20s to be able to start actually doing lyrics that I felt vocalized what I wanted to say. But that whole thing about are you creating content versus creating art? And I think at the time I was looking at it, I look back now, and I don't think when someone puts out a show, especially these cartoons, I look back on these are all super awesome. It was artwork in a way, but at the time I thought I'm reading these words on a page and I have to do it the way that the director wants.
Sure, it was somebody else's artwork.
It was somebody else's art, and I guess I was bringing my own artistic interpretation to this role in a way. That's the thing. I can look back and pick that apart, but at the time I was I wanted to do something that I was in complete control of, and at that time, music just seemed like this new, completely fresh way for me to do that.
I have to ask before we move on from the acting thing. I need to get this on the record. Were you or were you not in Crybaby at age 3?
No. Do you see that somewhere?
That's on your Wikipedia page.
My Wikipedia page is crazy.
The first credit is, God bless you if you're in a John Waters movie at 3, that's a pretty cool way to start your life.
If I was, I am not privy to it. That's hilarious. Sure. There was a time when my Wikipedia said that I was a superhero and I had a band of superhero people fighting to help make my first record a hit. People take that stuff over and I never know what's going on.
Is this your strange fan base that's doing this?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, if there's any fans out there that are listening to this, please someone fix my Wikipedia page because it's wild. There's a lot of credits. When I go, sometimes someone will, every time someone finds out that I did wait, you were a voice actor, immediately they pull up an IMDb and they're showing me you were in that and that, and I'll be honest, half the stuff I don't even remember doing. I sort of remember the titles. I was so young at the time.
You're walking into a booth, it's animation, right? So you just have no context for the final product.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the big ones, of course, I remember the ones with like series that were important.
You remember being Max.
Yeah, exactly. I remember that because I knew who Max was. Like, I knew the Lion King stuff. I knew the Teacher's Pet was cool because, like, I did that for a long time, and it was working alongside Nathan Lane. And even, like, at that point, that young, I knew who Nathan Lane was. So I was stoked on that. But a lot of stuff, like, I look back that I was, like, super naive about. Like, the last thing I did was not even a cartoon. It was a feature film. It was the Jeepers Creepers 2. You know, like in the horror movies that you have the one death in the beginning that kind of sets the tone for the whole. That was me. I was the first kid to die. And I set the whole tone because Ray Weiss is my dad and is now on, like, to seek vengeance for my death and to avenge his son. And that's the whole movie is based on that. But I didn't know who he was.
Leland Palmer.
Yeah. I'm like, if I would have seen Twin Peaks, like, I would have been freaking out. But, like, I went into that with a naivety that just probably made things easier. Probably acted way cooler than.
I think that's a good quality in a child actor, and probably something that a lot of these studios are looking for, because, like, especially if you've sort of been through the ringer and you're really a showbiz kid in that way, like, there's an authenticity that isn't there.
Oh yeah, I kind of have a naivety about all sorts of things. Like, some people are really, really good at Jonathan Rado. Really, really good at creating these, like, mind palaces of, like, everybody who's produced every single bit of music and knows every band member and every, you know, historical moment in music history. And I can't do that. Like, I know some songs that I really like, and I think I know the band name. Sometimes I don't even know the lead singer's name. Like, a lot of that times, I've definitely been in situations, especially with Foxygen, where I know I've been meeting people that I should know. I totally should know.
That's like a superpower of not, like, freaking out when you meet somebody famous.
Yeah, I guess I guess so. Like, there's definitely pros and probably a few cons about not knowing what you're doing or who you're talking to. But definitely, I think I'm always keeping my cool when I'm accidentally talking to Harrison Ford or something.
Han Solo, you know.
I know Harrison Ford. There's a few people I know, but there's a lot of people I know.
Sure. That was just the worst possible example.
I know. Well, it's like, I can't name the people who I don't know.
Touche. Are you done with the acting thing for good?
No. Well, so in between Everybody's a Good Dog and Internet Arms, I spent a few months at the Lyric Opera House in Chicago doing Jesus Christ Superstar. And that was my first time back into, like, live theater.
That really combines the two worlds for you in a nice way.
It was so much fun. I got to play Herod, and he was glammed the fuck up. I mean, he was so extra. I was wearing like this little loincloth, but, like, I was in full crazy drag. And then I had an 80-foot golden cape train. It was wild. I'd never done anything like that before. So it was like, and I got that role because of the casting director saw a Diane Coffee show. And they're like, you need to fly back to New York and, like, audition for this. Which is crazy because the show was in Chicago. And I live so close to Chicago, but I had to fly to New York to audition. Crazy. Yeah, that was really fun. And I would love to do that kind of a thing again. The only problem with theater like that, though, is that took months and months, and it was kind of a detriment to the Internet Arms record, just because the space in between, it's already, I mean, you do a whole album cycle, and then you write and record, and then you deliver, and by the time you delivered, you still have to wait. Now it's like, 10 months to a year for waiting in line for a record to get pressed.
Or longer if the label makes you hold it.
Yeah, or longer. I mean, like, and that really took a lot of steam out of, like, this momentum that I had with Diane Coffee. So I don't know if I'd necessarily at this point do another theater production like that. And that was pretty short as far as theater productions go. But yeah, I mean, being back in LA, I think I would like to kind of get back involved in that. I have to, again, start from the ground up. But I feel like I've finally settled in enough into Los Angeles. And I mean, I've got a album rollout that's currently happening, so I'm all consumed with Diane Coffee. But when I'm done with tour, I've definitely been considering just going back out, because I could knock out a couple auditions again. That'd be cool. I could do that.
It won't be as painful with a little time away, I suspect.
Yeah,
it's interesting to say that the character was glammed the fuck out and that you hadn't done that before. But I mean, obviously Diane Coffee you're inhabiting a different gender.
It's almost like a non-gender. It's just, it is glam. It is femme to an extent, but
you called the character her.
Yeah, I feel like it's become, Diane Coffee was never, the band name was never supposed to be like an alter ego. That sort of,
you very consciously chose like what sounds like a person's name.
Yeah, well, I thought, when I went into it, I never really took band names seriously. I mean, as long as the Beatles is just a dumb pun. You can have a stupid band name and just you make great music and it doesn't matter. So, it was pretty quick. I was listening to Diana Ross and it was like Diane. And then this other song I was listening to, Mr. Coffee. And I was like, cool, Diane, because I needed, the label's like, you need a band name so we can move on and print this record. Because I was just really pushing that. So it was a really quick thing. And then as that that being came into existence, or that energy happened, and people just, again, yeah, you're right. It sounds like a name, and people started calling me Diane a lot. And, I just sort of took on that role and yeah, I feel like Diane Coffee is genderless, but at the same time, it's both them. It's kind of whatever it is that it needs to be.
You're using they, them pronouns now, is that right?
Yeah, I'm fine with he, she, they, them.
The dynamic is really interesting to sort of inhabit this female character, but also interviews that you did for Internet Arms, it was all male pronouns. So it sounds like that's like a fairly recent transition.
I had, yeah, that's more of a recent transition. I've always known, well, no, I haven't always known, but I've always felt like something wasn't quite, I wasn't quite like just strictly male. I mean, I feel like it's pretty easy for me and family to fall into just using the male pronouns just because I went, 30 plus years of my life using that. So it just, it happens. And I really don't, for me personally, I understand how important they are for people, especially when you're finding your truth. For me, it wasn't really that important. I needed to know who I was inside. And, that was what was important to me. That's why I say he, she, they, it works for me because I kind of float. I've always found myself as more like gender fluid. It really depends on, because like we're talking about me being on stage, I feel a whole lot more feminine on stage than I do masculine, 100%. And, there'll just be periods of time where I just feel, more feminine, and that's fine with me. That's just who I am. But yeah, kind of as far as like using pronouns, like I change that up all the time.
I understand that, and I've talked to a lot of people who are in that place. I mean, obviously, making music, writing music, and then putting that music out in the world, these are like deeply personal acts. Bearing yourself on this record in particular, it seems like a very personal record. I wonder if inhabiting this character, this feminine character, sort of gave you permission to connect with the side of yourself that maybe you hadn't necessarily been comfortable connecting with previously.
Absolutely. I feel like I also needed to find the right verbiage for it. And I do thank, my wife, Melinda, for helping me through that.
No, I mean, it's not easy entering a relationship with somebody and like, them sort of coming out the other side, not being exactly what you thought they were going to be.
Yeah. Well, Melinda is in a somewhat similar, we'll go by they and she, another queer, amazing human being. And yeah, they know, they had that language for it. And when I was describing all the things that I had been feeling like throughout my life, just help me get there. And because the whole, Diane that you see on stage, they helped me cultivate that, like really put it together. And also, through doing that, it helped me find out who I actually was. I mean, I had been, mostly like growing up visibly, I was, a straight cis male.
You presented as male.
I presented as straight cis male, and secretly, like, I couldn't have relationships, but I'd see men. I'd kind of, again, like as I would change and shift, I would go through different changes, and I think that was the hardest part. Like before I even could understand like gender fluid, like feeling one way and then feeling a different way, and that not being okay because I couldn't figure out like what the hell was happening in my life. It was like super turbulent.
It existed, but we didn't have the language for these ideas in the same way that like if you were born a generation or two earlier, you wouldn't have had the language to describe being gay.
Yeah. I just thought I was, but that's the thing. Like I thought for a while, like, I'd see a boy and I'd be like, well, I'm gay. That's just what it is. And then I wouldn't, then I'd be attracted to a woman. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's not right. Maybe I'm bi. And then I'd have like whole periods where it's like, I'm not attracted to men at all. I'm like, well, maybe I was just exploring or, like I just didn't know what it was. And then it's just like, well, I feel feminine. I feel like a woman. Like maybe I'm trans. And then I wouldn't. And then I'd be like, well, no, okay, maybe I'm just gay. Or I couldn't figure it out. And it took me so long to just like land on the fluidity of my sexuality and my gender. And yeah, being Diane really did help me get there, and Melinda helped me get there. And this, the queer community that has kind of come up right alongside of Diane Coffee, like they helped me get there. And yeah, I think, again, I was just talking about how like the pronouns, like I never really cared too much about, but I guess I don't care about it now, but then trying to find something that was me was really important. That journey was important.
Once you figured it out.
And I'm still figuring it out.
Figured out, it's a strong word, but once you sort of had the words for it.
Yeah, there, I think there was a part of me that also, and again, I'm just talking about myself, but for me, I almost just stopped caring about it too much because I found the love of my life, and I can be whoever I am, and that person loves me. So I stopped really worrying about it. It's just like, I don't have to think about it too much. I love them, they love me, and I can just exist, and like that works. So I've kind of like, for now it's just like, if I feel a certain way, I can talk to them about it, and that's cool. And if I feel a certain way about it another day, I can talk about it and move on. So it's not really as big of a deal. I'll always be on a journey, but in some regards, like, I'm on the boat now, and that's good.
In a sense, you've parlayed it into a career, or at very least, like you have this outlet where you can
Yeah.
go full bore into that side of yourself.
Yeah. It's funny though, because like I said, like this is the first, like, you know, a lot of that, this, you know, a lot of me creatively has been very, you know, leaning on the Diane aspect of it. And like I said, there's like a lot of different versions of me, and I've been, you know, I haven't really, you know, done the Shaun Fleming thing. You know, there's something that's just not as crazy bombastic, and someone that, you know, I can actually talk about my past a little bit, you know, and like who I was growing up and the people who shaped me. And I think this was a very, very important record, like lyrically, for me to write. If anything, just to kind of like round out like what I actually want to say as a artist.
I think about the impact that the past 2 years have had on me on a personal level. I know that you're coming from what was sort of ostensibly almost like a concept record, right? The last one.
Yeah.
To something that I know in conversations now that I have with people, I'm honest in a way that I wouldn't have been before. There just isn't a lot of sort of bullshit. There isn't, you know, perhaps I've lost some of my social skills. I just have to be brutally honest with people. And like, and when people are asking me how I am, I'm honest. And I you know, I've been through some like health struggles and other things over the past year. And you ask me how I am, and, you know, I'm going to tell you what I've been dealing with. And, you know, I think that there are a couple ways that people could process these moments through art. And the way that you found, I think, is similar, that you found that like, it's a pandemic record, just in the sense that it's deeply personal, and that it's a side of yourself that maybe you wouldn't have been comfortable revealing to people 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think definitely the lockdown, living with myself, allowed me to really explore the depths of me, whereas like maybe I wouldn't have had that opportunity otherwise. Yeah, you know, this, you're right. I mean, coming out of Internet Arms, that was a concept record, and it was very clean. It was all in the box. And I feel like I had reached this point of like, that record was, there's a lot in that record. I love that record a lot, but like, because it was like an 80s, you know, synthesizers and talking about, you know, computers like taking over the world, like there's parts of it that are just silly. And like it again, like there was a lot of that record that I, you know, felt like it was make believe, you know. And going back to, you know, why I first started writing, I think when I was locked down, like taking a good look at myself, it's like I started writing because I had things I wanted to say and express about myself. And I feel like I started to maybe lose that a little bit. And so, yeah, being stuck with myself was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I mean, I think this is like, lyrically, I know this is the best album I've ever made. And I had more fun doing this than I had in like a very long time. And I got to do it with friends who I hadn't seen in a very long time. And I got to work through some issues that had been, you know, I've been kind of like dealing with for a long time. And yeah, so in a way, it's sort of the same thing. Like, you know, you ask me how I'm doing, and I'll release a record.